Welcome to the fifth episode of our podcast series, 50 Shades of Jewish Grief. I'm Rabbi Shlomo Segal. Please subscribe to this channel and give us a like. This podcast is dedicated to the memory of the Israeli hostages whose bodies were recently returned. Shiri Bibas, Ariel Bibas, Kfir Bibas, and Oded Lifshitz. Today's podcast is called Violent Deaths. Since the October 7th, 2023 massacre in Gaza, several questions have arisen regarding rituals of mourning for Jews who have been brutally murdered or who have been taken captive by terrorists, leaving their loved ones uncertain as to their status. I will deal with two of the more significant questions. First, when does a family sit shiva when the body of their relative has not been released to them? Shiva is a 7-day mourning period immediately following the burial of the deceased. 7 first-degree relatives are obligated to, quote-unquote, sit shiva. Children, parents, siblings, and spouses. Mourning begins when the body is buried and the grave is filled. The Shulchan Aruch, Code of Jewish Law, however, describes some cases when a body cannot be found. The examples cited are of people who have either drowned, have been killed by thieves, etc. When a death appears to be a certainty, but the body is not recovered, the ritual of mourning begins when the family despairs of finding the body. Every effort to retrieve the body must be made, but if there is absolutely no way of getting the body back, the mourners may proceed with shiva. In several of the cases in which hostages were murdered in Gaza following October 7th, many hostage relatives had given up hope of ever receiving the remains of their loved ones' bodies despite their diligent efforts to get them back. Therefore, if one's relative was, God forbid, taken captive by diabolical, tyrannical terrorists, it is perfectly reasonable to give up hope of ever getting the body back, and accordingly, the mourning process may begin. If the body is found after they give up hope and the ritual of mourning had already been observed, the relatives do not need to mourn again, but the children, if they were present when the body or parts of the body were found, do mourn for that one day only. But if they were not present and they hear about it after the day has passed, they do not engage in any rituals of mourning at all. The second question I will deal with is the proper observance of a Yahrzeit, the anniversary of the date of death, when one is brutally murdered on a date which is unknown. The Yahrzeit date is always according to the Jewish calendar. While it is ideal to commemorate a Yahrzeit on the date of death, the next best practice is to observe the rituals associated with a Yahrzeit on the day of burial. According to some authorities, the Yahrzeit for the first year should be observed on the day of burial. According to the Shulchan Aruch, the Code of Jewish Law, there is a general principle that the day of receiving a report of death is regarded as the day of the actual burial. That date, the date of receiving the bad news, is the best answer for when to observe the Yahrzeit each year. Some families of the hostages, however, might opt to observe the Yahrzeit on the Jewish anniversary of October 7th, 2023, which is Shemini Atzeret, the final day of the fall Jewish holiday season. Shemini Atzeret is certainly an appropriate day to observe the Yahrzeit for several reasons. Firstly, we recite the Yizkor memorial prayer on that day. Many congregations have added prayers to the Yizkor service, such as a memorial prayer for those who perished in the Nazi Holocaust. it would certainly be appropriate to add a memorial prayer for those whose lives were taken as a function of the October 7th massacre. The prayer should be followed by mourners' Kaddish to enable the families of the victims of October 7th to observe the day as a tribute to the memories of their loved ones' tragic passing. I would suggest that the Jewish people add a new dimension to the day of Shmini Atzeret to remember the victims of the October 7th massacre. The practice already has precedence. In 1948, the chief rabbis of Israel selected Asara B'Tevet, the 10th day of Tevet, which is one of the fast days on the Jewish calendar, as Yom HaKaddish HaKlali, the national day of Kaddish for the victims of the Holocaust, whose date or place of death is unknown. It is important to note that Yahrzeit dates are flexible. When the discussion of an anniversary of death first appeared in the Talmud, the observances described were much different from the way they are practiced today. The Talmud references the practice of fasting on a parent's Yahrzeit, and it also mentions taking a vow to abstain from meat and wine on the anniversary of a parent's death. Today, a Yahrzeit is typically observed by reciting mourner's Kaddish in memory of an immediate relative and lighting a memorial candle. Neither of those practices are obligatory in nature, and they are simply a minhag, a customary practice. Many people also give charity on the Yahrzeit day, the idea being that good deeds performed in this world elevate the soul of our loved one in heaven. In the Talmud, Rabbi Shmuel articulated the principle that when there is a doubt as to a particular mourning practice, the law is always in accordance with the more lenient opinion. In this way, the sages understood that having compassion for people experiencing some of the most difficult hardships of their lives is paramount. I'm Rabbi Shlomo Segal. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and I look forward to chatting with you in the comments below.